When was the last time that you went in for a checkup? No, not your physical health. I'm talking about your relationship. Are you handling conflict in a healthy way, or is it time for some intervention? Well, the doctor is in on Love Lessons.
Real life. Real talk. Real relationships. Faith-based tips, tricks, and challenges to improve your marriage and change your life. It's the Love Lessons podcast with your hosts, Christian counselors and marriage experts, Dr. Zach and Blair Gammon.
Hey, welcome to the show.
Why so sad? Why so down? Why so blue?
Just another example of how I am unloved and unsupported in this sham of a marriage.
What did I do now? How did I make you feel unsupported?
I did go to the doctor recently.
Okay.
To the eye doctor.
Oh, no.
Had to get my prescription changed. I wear glasses all the time. I refuse to wear contacts. Thought of sticking something in my eye makes me want to vomit. And so I wear glasses. However, I've reached a point in my life where it's time to be practical about the glasses
I felt you're pitching this to the listeners.
I am. I need some support. I have reached a point in my life where I am ready for transitions lenses. I don't want to have to switch from glasses to sunglasses when I, get in the car. And here I am, a full-grown man in my mid-30s, and I have been told in no uncertain terms that I am forbidden from getting transitions lenses. So yet again, I must ask the question, why don't you love me? Why can't I have what I want?
This has nothing to do with me loving you and me not giving you what you want. But to quote you earlier, it makes you want to vomit. Transition lenses. Being married to someone who wears transitions lenses makes me want to vomit. They are so ugly. They take forever to transition back from dark to light.
They take less than a minute.
Okay. I would need to see that to believe it, because the ones I'm thinking of, they take forever. And so you're just, inside Walmart acting like you're outside, and they look so silly, like mid-transition. They look dumb.
These are not Papa's lenses from the 90s.
In my head, they are.
Modern transitions lenses. Photochromatic technology allows them to transition very quickly.
Do you want me to look at you with disgust? Is that what you're wanting? Do you want me to look at you and vomit in my mouth a little bit?
I won't be able to see you anyway because they'll still be dark.
Well, okay, then there we go. You get them, I'll have my response, and you won't be able to tell. And then we'll be able to go on as if life were...
There was a song in the 80s about wearing your sunglasses at night. Why can't I wear my transitions lenses? It'll all be over soon, Blair.
Much like waterboarding, it will all be over soon.
It's okay. Mm-hmm. Don't fight it. It'll be over soon. Mm-hmm. I don't understand why you hate them so much.
I don't think you're going to understand. I've explained it. You don't agree. We're going to have to agree to disagree.
You're just, it's.
If you want to get them, you can. Just understand that I have a strong reaction.
No, because you're not going to love me.
No, I never said I wasn't going to love you. Exactly. No. I never said I wasn't going to love you. I said I would feel strongly and I would judge you for it.
I want to be supported. I want you to be happy for me.
I support you in getting them. I cannot support how I'm going to respond.
It must be really nice to sit over there on your high horse as somebody who doesn't have to wear glasses. You should be, because you're blind as a bat. It must be nice to sit on your high horse and, just be able to just casually throw on sunglasses whenever you want and not have to worry about, what am I doing with my glasses now? Make it make sense.
Okay.
Do you want a fun fact?
Do you have anything fun?
I have something for you.
Do you?
I'm going to have to say it off pod. It's not podcast. marriage has never been better. In a poll that was created by the group American Family Survey, a majority of their respondents said they appreciated their spouse more during the onset of COVID in 2020, which is interesting.
Yeah.
Especially as a therapist, I would have thought the opposite. Another study from 2011 actually shared similar results among married people who experienced the Great Recession in 2008 and 2009.
Okay.
All in all, during both periods, most people reported that their commitment increased rather than decreased during really difficult times.
What do you think that is?
I think that, there's shared intimacy around stress and around challenges, right? There's a word for it. Thank you. I've forgotten everything I've ever known, I guess.
The doctor must not be
The
in.
doctor is, where is the doctor?
We need a doctor.
I just...
Gosh, I'm carrying this entire thing.
It's amazing to me because every time that we record an episode, I think to myself, there is no way this can get any worse. And every time the bar just gets lower and lower. Every episode, I think this is the dumbest thing that we have ever done. And yet here we are again.
Not dumbest segment, because we have some redeeming qualities. I have some redeeming qualities.
Sure. Okay. Anyway, I think that crisis intimacy builds when people, during a crisis, you really get to see somebody's true colors.
Right.
And a lot of relationships may have somebody who's like really spacey or somebody who's really theatrical or overdramatic, and somebody who tends to do really well under pressure. What I think is interesting about me is that I am one of the most dramatic people I've ever met until there's a crisis. And that's typically when I find every ounce of resoluteness and calmness. And I'm like, we're just going to figure it out. Let's roll. Don't ask me to go find avocados in a grocery store I never walked into because I'll have a meltdown. But,
what's an avocado?
Right. I have literally never seen a growing vegetable or fruit in my entire life. Is an avocado a fruit or a vegetable?
I think it's like a tomato where it's technically a fruit because it has a seed.
Yeah, a big one.
But don't quote me on that. Don't take that to the bank.
Okay. This is not avocado lessons. Anyway, the point is I could have a straight up meltdown in the grocery store, but if the building's on fire, it is my time to shine. Well, the building's also shining. It's brightly burning. But the point is that I do that.
You need
really
your shades for that.
My transitions lenses. I bet my glasses would transition. It would be so bright. The point is, I think people in those situations really grow together.
Yes.
Because they have the opportunity to see the other person working under pressure.
It's kind of like, what do they say, a diamond is coal under pressure.
Yeah.
You can really get a beautiful thing created out of it, and it's super corny, but really and truly you're going to see what your relationship's made out of when you have some pressure on it.
Well, and the old adage is true. I've told people in marriage counseling, especially when there's been infidelity involved, I've told couples listen, if you survive this, you can survive just about anything. And I think that there's probably, I think people probably experience that too, especially in COVID. I mean, remember how stressful that was? Everything stopped like that.
Right.
Right. And you were an essential worker. You had to go to work. And I was able to work from home and, kind of coordinated online school for the kids and everything. Right. But that was really stressful for both of us in very different ways, right? And we could have allowed that stress to cause division between us, or I think that we grew closer during that time. So.
Well, and then you take something like COVID, where it was a health emergency and people were dying, and so not only are we in this crisis together and we're growing closer, but we get that perspective of life is short and that we could lose each other at any time, because this could, at that time early on, there were a lot of lives lost and still have been, in whatever. But what I'm getting at here is that it wasn't like the recession where it was people losing their homes and it was financial, which is still huge, but you still have your life.
Yeah.
With COVID, it was life and death for some people. And so I think that probably had an impact on it too.
I would say though, that I think that in both of those scenarios, and in really any other stressful situation, I as you were saying this, it kind of came to me. I would suspect that a lot of times the intimacy grows because that's the person that you have to rely on.
Right.
It's almost like forced intimacy because you need the two of you to survive. Whether it's the housing crisis and holy crap, are we going to lose the house? And if we do, how is our what are we going to do for our family? Or in COVID, like we've got to stay safe, or whatever it is. There's in those situations like you've got to lean on the other person.
Yeah.
So I think there's value in that.
I agree.
Conflict triggers strong emotions and can lead to hurt feelings and disappointment and discomfort. When handled in an unhealthy way, it can cause irreparable rifts, resentments, and even the end of relationships. But when conflict is resolved in a healthy way, it increases our understanding of one another, it builds trust, and it strengthens the bond of our relationships.
So we're continuing the conversation of conflict resolution.
Yeah.
And today we want to talk about our responses to conflict. There are healthy responses and there are unhealthy responses. And so we want to compare the two and ask you, where do you fall in each of these areas?
Yeah. And really, this is one of those situations where realization is so key to making a positive
Being
change.
self-aware of what we're doing and going, oh, that's not healthy, because sometimes you don't know until you know, right? And so that's what we're looking at today.
Yeah.
So when we look at unhealthy responses, let's start with the bad news before we get to the good news. Unhealthy responses to conflict, they're characterized by the following, okay? So the first is an inability to recognize and respond to matters that are of great importance to the other person.
Yeah. We've talked about this before, right? We've joked about it some, but at the end of the day, we just have to recognize that sometimes we're going to have a difference of opinion about what's a big deal.
Right.
Yeah.
So recognizing it and then responding appropriately. It's the inability to do both of those things. Yeah. So put some thinking into the last conflict that you had with your significant other and over something that they thought was a big deal and you didn't. Think back over that. Did you recognize that it was a big deal to them, or did they have to say, hey, this is a big deal, why aren't you taking this seriously? And did you respond appropriately? And maybe you recognized it, but you didn't respond appropriately. Maybe you did one, but not the other. So being aware that this is an issue and changing that inability to an ability to do so. Yeah. The next one is explosive, angry, hurtful, and resentful actions and reactions, right?
How many of those do you see in marriage counseling?
Yeah. Explosive, angry, hurtful, and resentful. When you are having those reactions, now hear me when I say this. I'm not saying that you are not entitled to have that emotion. We have talked about that. These are reactions, by the way. These are behaviors, not necessarily emotions. What I am saying is that you need to be aware that you're having them, but also when you're having these emotions or these reactions, things are not getting resolved. You're not resolving conflict. You're having reactions. When you are angry, you're usually taking on angry behaviors, such as slamming doors or silent treatment or yelling or throwing things, etc. And I know some of those are extreme, but you're taking on angry and hurtful and resentful behaviors. You're not actually in a place where you're able to come to the table to resolve any conflict.
Right.
Those are negative reactions, which if you want to have those, okay, but understand the repercussions of having those. It's an unhealthy response to the conflict you're having.
Yeah. It's not, there's nothing helpful in that situation. You're only either just extending the disagreement for longer or you're causing more harm in that situation.
Yeah.
Right.
And so what I would say is, why are you responding? Why are you reacting in an unhealthy way? What is going on underneath that is causing that to be the case?
It just goes back to that question of why. What's under the surface?
Right.
What is happening? Why do you react this way? What is causing this to well up within you? What part of that needs to be healed?
Right. Maybe they said something to you that was disrespectful. and maybe you responded angrily. Your reaction was of anger. Okay. Why was their disrespect so hurtful to you that it caused you to react in that way? I'm not saying that disrespect is comfortable by any means. What I'm saying is there's some root in your life that has caused, is that something you're stumbling over? Is that something that's causing this reaction out of you to be so extreme and explosive?
Exactly. Really becoming self-aware and learning why we feel what we feel, as we've said before, can have such an impact on the health of your relationship.
That, and then having charity and love and grace, and having the desire to resolve conflict and not necessarily be right. Those two things can change an entire relationship.
Exactly.
The quickest.
Yeah. Here's another one. The withdrawal of love resulting in rejection, isolation, shaming, and fear of abandonment. So we actually addressed this a little bit in last week's episode in one of the dirty laundry questions. This is incredibly common in really negative and destructive relationships where one or both people just makes the environment emotionally hostile.
Yeah.
And there are no winners in that situation.
It places conditions on love. I'm only going to love you when things are good, but when we have this conflict, I'm going to withdraw my love or make you feel like our love is less than, or I'm less than, by rejecting you, by threatening to leave, that fear of abandonment, by shaming you, any of those negative things that we're doing to manipulate or control. I'm going to use those when you don't do something that I like. I'm going to control you back into the good behavior I want you to accomplish by doing these negative things.
Yeah.
And it's placing conditions on love. I'm only going to love you if you're meeting my standards and doing what I want you to do.
Which is, by definition, the opposite of what love is.
Yes. Yes, it is.
Yeah.
So be self-aware. Are you doing that? When you have conflict, are you rejecting? Are you shaming? I would even say silent treatment falls into that category.
Yeah.
Right? Are you threatening? Fear of, we shouldn't do this anymore. I'm just going to leave. We don't need to be married anymore. If we can't get through this, then we're just not going to be together. Any of those things. Are you using that type of language? Or are you doing any of these behaviors? If so, you are handling those in an unhealthy way. You're not resolving the conflict. You are responding inappropriately.
Well, and just like everything that we've talked about, there's a difference between using this in a negative way and needing time to express and process emotions.
Yes.
Right?
Intent.
Yes. Needing to get some space to yourself so that you can process the anger or the hurt or the whatever that you're feeling is not the same as withdrawing love and affection. Right?
Yes.
It is a personal withdrawal because you were putting a personal boundary in place to be able to process in a healthy way, but that's not the same as withholding love and affection.
Right.
Right? And I would also, I would also even say that, there have been times where couples, have one person says to the other person, why are we doing this? Like, what is the point in this relationship? Not in a negative way, but like, we're just hurting each other. Is this what we want for our relationship? That is not manipulative or hurtful or whatever.
If you're asking those questions to really create a conversation and to create understanding and to resolve conflict, then no, that is not hurtful. If you were saying those things as a foundation to lay to discuss abandonment, then yes, it is.
Yeah. Where's your heart at in the situation, right? What are you doing to support the relationship, to show love and kindness and charity, and that you said it in a couple of episodes, and it's so incredibly true. What's the intent? Where is the heart behind what you're doing?
Yeah. The next one is the expectation of bad outcomes.
Gosh, how many times have you heard people sit in your office and say, well, there's no point in trying because he's always going to do this or she's always going to be
It's
like
always
this.
going to be this way.
Yeah.
And, to be very transparent, this is probably one of my more unhealthy responses to conflict. Even today, not nearly as much as it used to be, but remember when we first got together, when we had an argument, I was like, well, we're just not going to do this anymore. Like, this is just always how it's going to be. We're just always going to argue, and that's just how it's going to be if we're going to be together. And I remember you asked me, like, why do you have this view of things? Because I had this view that people argued and they got to a point where they were tired of arguing and they said, we're not going to be together anymore. And they moved on and they just did that same cycle over and over. And they didn't stay together because that was my understanding of relationships. And you called me on it. And I was like, because that's how it works. And you're like, no, Blair, that's not how it works. And luckily we were able to move out of, I was able to move out of that mindset. But even in some of our conflicts that it feels like we've not been able to resolve over the years, I'm like, well, here it goes again. It's just going to be the same thing it always is. This pessimistic view of how it's going to turn out and not having hope.
And I would even say, having done this personally and professionally for many years now, that if that's your belief, then that's probably the truth. If you always go into it thinking this is how it's always going to be, that's probably how it's going to turn out. Because everything that you do is in anticipation of the outcome that this is not going to work.
Right.
So therefore, it's probably not.
You're sabotaging it because you're
Yes.
creating an environment that where you're wanting that to happen. Even though it's
Yes.
something you want, you're expecting that to happen.
Yeah. It's frustrating, from a counselor or a pastor's perspective too, because, especially, looking at it from the outside in and being able to see it from an objective point of view, I'm like, oh my gosh, just stop saying that, because it's a cop out.
Yeah.
It's refusal to accept any responsibility on your part and just saying, well, I'm not even going to try because this is how you're always going to be. Okay. Well, you've been married for 3 months. You don't know how it's always going to be, right? Like, get a grip.
Yeah. And it's also punishment. It's words to use against the other person. This is how it's always going to be because you're always like this, is what you're not saying. You are not changing your behavior, so this is how it's always going to be.
Meanwhile, I'm not changing mine either. I'm just complaining.
And so what you're doing is you're shaming the other person, which goes back up to what we were talking about. You're withdrawing love from them by using that as a way to shame them.
I mean, really, all of these are just examples of ways that you're trying to maintain control, right?
Yep.
So,
Yeah. So the last one here is the fear and avoidance of conflict.
oof, this one's mine.
Yep. And not in a
fear of,
silent treatment type of way, but in a let's add some humor to it and gloss over it and act like everything's okay.
if you're fine, I'm fine. That's all that matters.
Yep. Don't rock the boat.
Right.
But in reality, kind of like we've talked about before, you can sweep it under the rug, but eventually you're going to trip on those things because they never are resolved.
Right.
They're always just hanging out, waiting for the next similar incident to pop up for you to pull them out and say, see, this has happened before. You've done this before. It's ammunition for future disagreements.
And that's where the resentment builds.
Yep.
And it's just, there is, if you avoid it, there is no good outcome to that, right? It's not just going to magically work itself out.
And people say, well, we just stopped talking about it, so it stopped becoming an issue. No.
You became complacent in that.
You became complacent. It stopped being a current pressure point in your relationship, but it didn't stop being an issue. The next time something similar comes up, it will come back up. You did not get resolution. You just stopped. It's like you don't know who won the game. Not that there's winner or losers, but as far as an analogy goes, you just stop playing in the middle of the game. We don't know what happens.
Yeah.
Because we didn't see the end of it.
And I would even argue, there are couples who get to a point where they stop talking about the issue, and they say, well, we never could find resolution, so we're never going to discuss it again. And it may never come back up, but that doesn't mean that it's no longer an issue. It just means that there has been a rift that's been caused within your relationship, and now there is separation.
Correct.
You might be able to, move forward and laugh and cut up and still have a good relationship, but there is still closeness there that's lacking because you chose not to engage in a situation and not to find resolution for it.
Yeah, because when you find resolution, it's not necessarily only finding resolution for the thing that you disagreed on. It's how are we going to handle it since we have difference of opinions or we agree differently. And so when you stop talking about something, you're no longer discussing the thing you disagreed on, but you haven't resolved how you're going to handle the fact that the two of you have created rifts and you don't disagree, or that you disagree, that you're not on the same page. So you're just not talking about the thing that you disagree about or that you're having conflict about, but you've not discussed how you're going to handle the fact that you have feelings about each other related to that.
Yeah.
Those are the things that build up resentment and bitterness and anger. And to go back to what you said earlier, if you are fearful or you're avoiding the conflict, why?
Yeah.
Why are you feeling that way? Is it a relationship pattern that you've created with this person? Is it because of a past relationship that you've had? Is it something that you're predisposed to? Like, why are you fearful to have a hard conversation? Why are you avoiding it? What's happened before? And how can you address that so that that root is taken care of and it's healthy, so your responses out of that would be healthy?
You know, two thoughts here. One, a lot of people, when they get into these habits and sometimes they recognize them on their own, like this isn't working and whatnot. And a lot of times what I see when couples who are in constant conflict with each other, one person will say, hey, why don't we go to marriage counseling or talk to our pastor or talk to a trusted friend to see if we can find some resolution in this. And then the other person's like, no, we're not going to do that. They can't help us. Like, well, you can't even help yourself.
How do you know they can't help?
Right.
You haven't tried it.
Right.
That's like saying, no, I don't like that food. Have you ever tried it? No, I just know I'm not going to like it.
Right.
You've already decided, so it's not going to work.
Yeah.
Because if you do it, like we talked about, you're setting yourself up for failure. You're anticipating your response. And so you are not going to respond in any way other than what you've already anticipated you're going to. You're not going to let yourself. It's a control thing.
Listen, I'm not saying that everybody needs to be in therapy. I think everybody can benefit from it, but I'm not saying everybody needs to be in it. But if one spouse comes to the other and says, I think that we need to go to counseling, chances are you do. Like, get off your high horse, because if you were able to fix this on your own, you already would have. That's just another unhealthy avoidance tactic.
And here's the thing, guys. If you go to counseling and you don't need it, the counselor will tell you don't need it. Right? Like, I don't need you on my caseload.
Right.
I've got a list, a waiting list. Like, if you were worried that you don't need counseling and your spouse thinks you do and that they're trying to control you into it and they're being dramatic and you really don't need it, go to counseling.
Yeah.
And let the counselor say, hey, guys, based on what you're telling me, I don't really think you need counseling. Or why don't we do once a month sessions for a couple months just to work on some skills and get some tools in our toolbox, and then we'll move forward. Like, the counselor will tell you if you need it or not based on what you're going through. And I would think I would much rather listen to a professional who does this all the time tell me based on what I'm telling them about my relationship if I need counseling or not, versus me with my perspective of only being in this marriage, or maybe you've been in whatever, this small perspective. I would much rather listen to a professional tell me. It's like, no, doc, sorry, I don't need a cast for my broken arm.
Yeah.
I didn't know you went to medical school, bruh.
Right.
Why don't you let a professional tell you if you do or don't?
Yeah. It's...
But I'll get off on how worse on that one.
It's frustrating. Here's the other thing, too, though. Stuff like this happens so often in marriage and relationships. But here's what I ask people a lot of times. If this conflict that you were having were with a coworker or someone at church or a friend, would you react in the same way that you do to your spouse?
Right.
Why do you treat your spouse so much worse than how you treat other people? Why do they get the brunt of all of your frustration and anger?
Yep.
Because it's easier? Because it's harder for them to get away from you because they're stuck?
Because they signed up for this, so it's just what they have to deal with.
Yeah. I think it's important to ask yourself that question. Why is it okay for me to talk to my spouse or not talk to my spouse like this? Why is it okay for me to behave this way in this relationship and not in other relationships?
Why is it okay for me to behave the worst to them when they're the person I should be treating the best?
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. So we've harped on all of these unhealthy responses to conflict.
Told you all the ways you suck.
Yeah. So let us tell you healthy responses and compare your responses to these. And if you have some wins, check that box.
Yes.
Celebrate that, because it's not easy to have healthy responses to conflict.
Takes a lot of practice.
Well, like we talked about last week, we did not learn these things. These are not learned things unless you had fantastic parents who taught you these things, and then you were able to work them out. They modeled for you. You were able to work them out and practice them. These are things you have to learn over time as you grow your emotional maturity.
Yeah.
So the first one is the capacity to recognize and respond to important matters.
So this is really just a juxtaposition
Correct.
of the first point and what we were talking about with unhealthy coping skills. We talked about this last week too, but there's so much value in saying, you know, like I don't see it that way, but I recognize that it's huge to you, and I want to love and support you through that. No, I'm not talking about transitions lenses. I'm talking about if this is serious, if you were hurting, if you feel strongly about this, like I want to support you and let you know that I love and I value you, even if I see it differently.
Right.
Yeah.
That I have love and honor and respect for you and your perspective, and that God made you, again, unique, and that we don't have to agree and believe the same things, but I can honor and love you enough to understand that this might be for you.
Yeah.
This might be your vanilla ice cream where I'm chocolate.
Exactly. It's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay. Just support the other person.
Support the other person. Yeah. The next one is a readiness to forgive and forget.
I am amazed at how many people that I know who profess to be Christians who refuse to forgive other people. That is that the pinnacle of our faith, that we are to forgive. And, well, I just can't because he never remembers to take out the trash. Like, for Pete's sake, like, stop holding on to that. Stop doing that to yourself, let alone your relationship. Stop holding on to that.
I would say if someone says they are a Christian and they are adamantly refusing to forgive someone, and I'm saying adamantly because there are times that we have unforgiveness we don't even realize. It's unrealized unforgiveness that we have to go through a process to realize. So this is realized forgiveness. This is, I know I'm holding on to this situation, whether it's with my spouse or someone else, and I'm refusing to forgive. What I would say is, how is your relationship with God doing? If you are actively disobeying one of his commands, then I'm going to imagine that your relationship is suffering.
Well, Scripture is clear that God expects forgiveness and that he will not forgive someone who does not forgive, right? It's the parable of the individual who owed his master, and his master had mercy on him, and then he went and turned around and went to one of his servants and refused to forgive a very small debt,
right? And
tried to throw him in jail for it. And God makes it clear that is the worst articulation of a parable that I have ever heard. But y'all know what I mean. Point is that God says that he will not forgive an unforgiver. So if you are holding on to bitterness and unforgiveness, that tells me that it's not really much of a question where your relationship is with God.
But what I'm also getting at here is, has it ever been where it needs to be? Not only is it not now, but have you ever gotten to a point where you're like, oh wow, God is calling me to forgiveness? Not just his word is true, but has the Holy Spirit prompted you to forgive? Are you in a deep enough relationship with God that you would be aware of the Holy Spirit prompting you to do so?
Yeah. And forgiveness does not give permission to continue being hurt.
No. And we will go into a much deeper dive into forgiveness. Because this is a huge thing that plagues people. But on the quick and dirty, if you will, it's not permission to continue the behavior in the future. Boundaries are very important.
It doesn't make it okay.
It doesn't make what happened to you
or
okay.
Validate your feelings.
Nope.
Or any of that.
But we are called to take that. What you're really doing is you're taking this chain that's wrapped around you and you're placing that chain onto Jesus. You were saying, I'm no longer holding on to the weight, the chains that is this situation, that this unforgiveness, but I'm going to give it to Jesus and he's going to handle it for me. And Scripture's clear that will happen. So Do you need to forgive your spouse for a big thing or for a little thing? Do you need to forgive yourself? And is that causing you to stumble in how you respond and cope with your spouse? Maybe you've done something and you're responding in an unhealthy way because of your own unforgiveness for your own issues.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe you need to look at that. Why? We'll go back to our why here.
And here's the thing. You said, if you have this realized resentment, bitterness, and unforgiveness, this is you, because if you're listening to this or you're watching this and you're starting to get annoyed because we're talking about it, and they think they don't know my situation. Yeah.
It's
time to go talk to God.
This might be you.
Yes. Go talk to God. There's no, if you are holding on to unforgiveness and you have recognized that, there's no real secret of what you need to do. It's just that you need to figure out the why that you're feeling that way and how you can best move forward. Right.
Yeah.
It's freedom.
So in Ephesians, it talks about putting on the full armor of God. And it talks about, let me pull it up here. And it talks about all the things that you're going to put on, what the armor looks like then. But it says, and with your feet fitted with the readiness that comes from the gospel of peace. And a healthy response is the readiness to forgive and forget. So readiness in both of those. And when you forgive, there is peace, right? And so this is literally one of the fruits of the Spirit. You can see how it would connect to that fruit of the Spirit, or that part, putting on your armor, excuse me. That's the fruit of the Spirit too. But being able to live in that peace, being ready, and that's a action word, right? Like, we're actively taking steps to, and it's not passively happening. We're taking steps to make sure that happens in our life, even when it's hard.
Yeah, exactly. Forgive. Starting right now. Go do it.
And forgive Zach for all the bad dad jokes that he makes. Thank you, guys.
Bless your hearts. So here's the next one. The ability to seek and compromise and avoid punishing. How much easier would your life be if you sought compromise on a situation and didn't just want to dig your heels in?
Right. And also avoiding punishing. And what I would say is why? Go back to our why. But evaluate your motives. Are you responding in a way, and your motive and your intent is to punish? Maybe it is not in any of the ways that we've described, but you realize that you are taking an action just to make a jab at somebody, or get your other partner, your significant other, your partner, to understand what it is that what are your motives here? If you might be using really creative ways to punish them, and you don't even realize that that's your intent when you're doing it.
Exactly.
So evaluate your actions to see, are you using punishment, even in a creative way?
Right. It all goes back to what is at the heart of what we're trying to accomplish. What are we trying to do here? Are we seeking to grow in the relationship, or are we seeking to win? Every time.
And that goes into the next one. A belief that resolution can support the interests and needs of both parties.
Yeah.
If I believe that resolution, compromise, is going to support both of us, both of our needs, but ultimately the need that our relationship has as its own entity, if I understand that and I agree with that belief, then I'm going to move forward in that. I'm going to be able to make choices with that belief in mind. If I believe that I have to be right, or that we're not going to be able to see eye to eye on something, or that we can't compromise, or whatever it is, then I'm going to struggle to respond in a healthy way.
Exactly.
So understanding that you need to change your perspective and look
Today's love note is a reminder that you are allowed to make a big deal out of things that are a big deal to you. Each of us are unique, each of us are different, and we see the world differently because of our own lived experience. And so we are going to have situations come up that we think are a big deal that maybe other people see differently. That's okay. I'm not talking about unrealistic responses to situations, but rather things that are important to you even if they're not important to other people. It is important to feel your emotions. We have feelings for a reason, but it's equally important that we realize other people may have a different perspective, and we can't expect them to feel the same way about the things we do.
Here's something that's a big deal to me that I need you to also make a big deal out of.
What?
I'm hungry and I need you to feed me.
Oh, yes, absolutely. I'm also
Are you
making a big
good
deal
for
out of
that?
this. Yes,
Okay.
I'm starving.
Okay.
Welcome to Hunger Lessons.
Actually, goodbye from Hunger Lessons is more
We have
appropriate.
nothing left to offer you. We are starving. It's time to go eat. If you haven't had a snack, go have one yourself.
See you guys.
Bye.
Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of the Love Lessons Podcast. If you're enjoying the show, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcast. That helps others find the show, and we greatly appreciate it. Once again, thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next episode.